Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. My name is Joe Rubenstein and it is Wednesday, August 8th, and the Yankees pull off an ugly win in Chicago last night, this morning actually, but we'll take it. Took 13 innings. Just a game of multiple missed opportunities. Had Hicks on third base with nobody out in the sixth. Didi pops up, Gleyber pops up, Greg Bird, who at this point, I'm ready to send Bird down to AAA. I mean, put Neil Walker at first, bring up Torres as our utility infielder, and let's do it. I mean, Greg Bird is just worthless right now at the plate, but we get a lead in the Stanton home run. You thought you could go to bed, but no, you thought wrong. This is 2018, so Zach Britton comes in and blows the save. But a nice little rally in the 13th, and Sonny Gray, of all people, on the mound for the win, pitched the last 3 innings, and he was phenomenal. So I think it was his best moment as a Yankee. So like I said, ugly win, weird win, but we'll take it, as this has been a week from hell in Yankee land, and we'll get to it all. Big episode today, double episode in fact. Because I don't know why. I guess I just had a lot to say after that fiasco in Boston, so buckle up. I got a few choice remarks for what's been going on with this team, but honesty is the best policy. That's what I say. You can follow us on Twitter, @BombersPodcast is the handle. You can also send us questions. We'll try to answer each and every week in our mailbag segment here in the podcast. You can like us on Facebook, subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher. We're on Spotify as well, or give us a call, 646-854-4959, and as always, you can send your comments and questions to joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com. Really, however you'd like to engage with us, we love engaging with you. Coming up a little bit later on in our Twitter poll this week, some interesting results when we asked if you would replace Aaron Boone if the Yankees continue to play 500 ball, and he's the resident expert at the blog Yanks Go Yard. Our good friend Mike Calendrillo rejoins the show for a wide-ranging conversation you will not want to miss, and I'll give you my honest take on the state of the Yankees. A little tough love today. All that and more coming up on today's Bronx Bombers. Back in a moment.
Bronx Bombers Trivia. Which of these 4 Yankee pitchers has the most World Series wins? Is it A, Lefty Gomez, B, Whitey Ford, C, Allie Reynolds, or D, Andy Pettitte? The answer coming up a little bit later in the podcast.
And now here's Joe with this week's main thing.
So here's the deal. The Yankees have been a 500 ball club all summer, which is the definition of mediocrity. Now summer isn't over and that could change, but just to be clear, it didn't start in Boston. Let's not forget, getting swept by the Rays at the end of June and then losing a bunch of games to awful Baltimore, including that game last Wednesday before they went up to Boston. Sonny Gray got rocked for 7 runs by what's essentially a AAA lineup with Baltimore. But it wasn't just Sonny. Hicks struck out 3 times looking. Stanton struck out with the bases loaded. Neil Walker hit into a double play with the bases loaded again. That was, and there was ugly defensive work as well. All those problems, atrocious starting pitching, shoddy defense, shocking ineptitude with runners in scoring position, especially with the bases loaded, and questionable managerial decisions. All those problems followed them to Boston, where incredibly they established new low points for the season 4 days in a row. Those games just, they weren't competitive, not even remotely, and the Yankees got just totally handled by their worst enemy, but really they destroyed themselves in many ways. You had a horrendous start by Sabathia featuring an errant throw to first base, 15 feet from Greg Bird's outstretched mitt, yield to an even worse performance by our vaunted bullpen in that same game. Holder gives up 7 earned runs before Boone pulls a much too late. Remember, we started that game with a 4-0 lead, but of course, the Yankees pitching staff continues to make Steve Pearce, whose career in pinstripes was totally unremarkable, look like Babe Ruth. Pearce hitting 4 home runs in just 2 games in that series. The Yankees lineup continues to make Rick Porcello look like Sandy Koufax, managing just a single hit against him. And the next day with Nathan Eovaldi, they were just as bad, striking out like there's no tomorrow, never working the count. And of course, Sunday's blown save was the capper. And, as if it wasn't enough to get humiliated on national television on Sunday night, they managed to instill confidence in David Price, who had previously been beyond awful against the Yankees, but against whom the Yankees couldn't really do much of anything until they got a couple of base runners in the 6th. The Red Sox bring in Hembree, who implodes, partially due to the error by Bogarts. But the Yankees did the Red Sox one better in the implosion department, choking away a 3-run lead in the 9th inning. And then who else? Andrew Benintendi with a walk-off single against Holder, whose strong early season may in fact have been a mirage. He unraveled twice in that Boston series. And Chapman, who, let's face it, he's worked with base runners all year and who has struggled with command recently, was just atrocious. I mean, when you walk Sandy Leone, the Red Sox number 9 hitter, you're basically placing your own head in the guillotine and saying, let's do this. This entire series was a nightmare. I mean, giving up 15 runs, 19 hits, and 4 steals in the first game alone. The first time ever that the Red Sox managed that many runs, hits, and steals in a single game against the Yankees, ever. And typically, the one thing the Yankees did well in that game, that first game, the one thing they've done well all year, hit home runs, they did. They had 4 home runs in that first game, but their sloppiness, their, again, ineptitude in every other facet of the game rendered those home runs meaningless, ultimately losing that game by 8 runs. And, there was plenty of blame to go around defensively. Torres made mistakes, but Andujar in particular was just awful. I mean, not making light of an injury here, but you think, the one silver lining as a fan of Sanchez not being in the lineup is you don't have to look at all those passed balls. But honestly, watching Andujar butcher what should be ground ball outs time and time again is frankly just as bad and just as costly. And so the Red Sox, sweep the Yankees for just the 4th time in the last 50 years. And the Yankees, over the past 3 years, are now 8-18 in Fenway. That's their worst record in any American League ballpark. And I could go on with gory stats and gory details, but I won't. Bottom line, the Yankees were utterly outclassed in every facet of the game in Boston: hitting, pitching, defense, managing. And speaking of managing, I can't even listen to Aaron Boone anymore after these ugly losses. He makes about as much sense in those post-game interviews. He might as well be speaking in tongues. When he said after Saturday's fiasco that the Yankees had some really good at-bats, it reminded me, this is before my time, but I read a lot of American history. And during the Vietnam War, when the military would brief the press, the American reporters used to call it the 5 o'clock follies. 5 o'clock is when the briefings were held, because no matter how bad the war was going, success was right around the corner. Richard Pyle, Associated Press Saigon bureau chief, described the briefings as, quote, the longest playing tragic comedy in Southeast Asia's theater of the absurd, unquote. And no, I'm not comparing a baseball season to war. They're not remotely comparable in any way. But I was reminded of that phrase, 5 o'clock follies, because Boone's press conferences after some of these games are detached from reality in a similar way. And look, the Yankees are going to make the playoffs, largely because of our easy remaining schedule, and the competition for the 2 wildcard spots is not that imposing. I mean, the Mariners are even more mediocre than the Yankees, and I don't think the A's maintain this pace. So the Yankees will likely get home field in that game and will likely win it. But let's be honest, this was not the goal this year. This was to lose a division yet again to the Red Sox and play another do-or-die wildcard game. This was not a transition year. This year, 2018. We had all the pieces, supposedly, to make a championship run. I mean, Sports Illustrated picked us to win the whole thing. And so, I mean, yes, the record is good, but what's really propping it up is a 17-1 stretch back in May. Take away that stretch, and we're 51-43, which is not bad, but it's far from great. Okay, so rather than do my usual good, bad, and ugly segment this week, I thought I'd just give my general perspective on the state of the Yankees, because let's face it, I mean, it's been pretty ugly all around all week, with a few exceptions. I mean, Monday night, Lance Lynn gave perhaps the best performance by a Yankee starter all year, retired a career-high 19 in a row at one point, with 9 strikeouts. I loved what I saw from Lance Lynn, and if we see, some of the same, especially against better teams than Chicago, Cashman should definitely consider signing him before he hits free agency. And I thought, Chance Adams showed promise against the Red Sox on Saturday. I'll discuss him more with Mike Calendrillo later on this podcast, but there's no sugarcoating what happened up there in Boston. I mean, the Red Sox absolutely pulled the Yankees' pants down on national television, and it was tough to watch. In fact, that first game after the Holder implosion, I'll be honest, I switched to preseason football. I couldn't hack it. So here goes, the state of the Yankees, and we'll do this by bullet points. I've I've got 4. So bullet point number 1. The Yankees do not play good fundamental baseball. They do not play crisp, winning October baseball. And that is my number one concern moving forward. And it speaks poorly of the manager, and it speaks poorly of the coaching staff as well as the players. They've been caught not hustling out of the box. They've been caught not covering bases or covering the wrong base. They've been caught botching rundowns. They've been caught misplaying or taking too much time fielding ground balls. They've committed horrendous base running blunders, taking extra bases for no earthly reason and getting thrown out by 15 feet. They've done a bad job holding runners. They've done a bad job throwing out base stealers. And obviously the pass ball situation is an ongoing nightmare. We saw all of this throughout spring training, and people laughed it off and said, they drooled over Judge and Stanton and Sanchez. And we saw it in April. People said, it's early, just relax. We even saw it during that hot streak in May, but it was camouflaged by the home run barrage. So if you pointed it out during that, win streak, people just, called you negative or called you a nitpicker. But, as the great philosopher Yogi Berra once said, it gets late early out there, and we're now approaching mid-August, and nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. This is a bad defensive baseball team. This is a team that fails way too often at situational hitting, and this is a pitching staff that does not throw strikes, that walks number 9 hitters time and time again. What this team does, and maybe, the only thing they do really well, is hit home runs. And the painful fact is that the Red Sox only have 23 fewer home runs than we do. And guess what? All those other things we don't do, they do very, very well. And so it's really tough to win a World Series that way, doing one thing well. You take a look at the championship teams throughout history, look at their stats, and you won't find a single one, not one, that excelled in that single facet of the game, home runs, and otherwise played poorly. You just won't. So whether or not that can improve mid-season is an open question, but it's a glaring flaw, lack of fundamentals, and it really makes this team a chore to look at a lot of the time. Bullet point number 2. It seems clear that Brian Cashman was negligent this offseason in regards to starting pitching, and that's been a problem during most of his tenure. Even the 2009 championship team did not have a shutdown staff. They were better than this staff, but that was mostly, an offensive powerhouse. And let's face it, the re-signing of 38-year-old CC Sabathia was a major gamble, which appears to be not paying off. Now, I'm recording this before his start against the White Sox on Tuesday, but in that game on Thursday in Boston, he looked like he was going to have a coronary on the mound, just sweating, huffing and puffing. And as for the rest of the staff, Tanaka's been better recently, and he's not going anywhere. He's guaranteed $23 million per year for 2 more seasons, so there was nothing to be done about Tanaka during the offseason once he wisely decided not to opt out. But Gray did nothing basically last year to inspire any real confidence. And frankly, I wasn't shocked that he fell off the map this year. So Cashman, for all of his extraordinary gifts, and I do think he's like in the 99th percentile of baseball GMs, but his one major flaw, he seems to focus almost exclusively on offense. I think sometimes he wants to club his way to our 28th championship, and it's not going to happen. Now injuries have hurt us for sure. Montgomery with a Tommy John surgery, Tanaka pulled 2 hamstrings because the idiots who run Major League Baseball can't get it through their thick skulls that pitchers hitting and running the bases is totally moronic. And it may very well turn out that these 2 additions of Happ and Lynn help stabilize this rotation. And I like what I've seen so far, but this staff was not constructed. This is not a championship staff. Even before all this bad stuff went down with the injuries, you knew that if Severino faltered, which he most certainly has, his ERA in his last 5 starts is 8.28, that if he faltered, we were basically screwed. And, the problems in our rotation have had major repercussions in our bullpen, obviously. Since there's been so many games where we've been, our starters have only gone 5, 4, 3, sometimes 2 innings in the case of Sonny Gray. If that doesn't change, our bullpen's going to be fried by October. Fried. These guys are logging heavy innings, regular 2, sometimes 3 inning stints, and they have been since day 1. So this vaunted bullpen, touted by some as the best in baseball, even the best in baseball history, has been shaky at best, and this is not a championship staff. At least it wasn't before the addition of Happ and Lynn, and Cashman has to look in the mirror, acknowledge that flaw, and correct it moving forward. Point number 3. This team strikes out way, way, way too much, and it's a really disagreeable thing to look at, and the result is even more disagreeable. I mean, Boston has struck out 859 times this year. That's a home run hitting ball club, and they have the 6th fewest strikeouts in baseball. Houston has even fewer, 846. Then they're in first place. Cleveland, the fewest strikeouts in baseball, just 815. And the Yankees have struck out 979 times this year. The only teams in the American League with more strikeouts are the last place Texas Rangers and the 4th place Chicago White Sox. And the hitters just, they either don't know how to adjust or they've been unwilling to adjust. I mean, how many times this year have we seen Stanton, Sanchez, even Judge swing at pitches way, way out of the strike zone? Hundreds? Thousands? And it's not a case of just being fooled by good pitchers. They do it all the time. And throw in crappy defense and horrid starting pitching, and this is how you get swept by the Rays. This is how we have a losing record against Baltimore. This is how we drop winnable games against the Mets, the Tigers, and the Rangers. The hitters do not adjust. And we saw this in the playoffs last year, especially on the road. And I hate to say it, but Boston, Houston, and Cleveland, those are first-rate pitching staffs. First-rate. And that's who we're going to be facing in the postseason. And again, as a fan, it's just, errors and constant strikeouts are nauseating to serious fans of baseball, really any viewer. And Yankee fans have seen way too much of both this year. Okay, final point. I understand, the desire to keep payroll low and build the farm system. I think that's a winning approach. And the Yankees, they're not trying to win just one title here. They're trying to win multiple titles, to recreate a kind of dynasty here. A few years where they have a shot to win multiple titles. But I really think that this offseason, it's time to stop obsessing about the luxury tax and spend the money that needs to be spent. Do it wisely, but do it. The Yankees have resources. They have money, and they've built up one of the better farm systems in baseball, which is great, but we don't have room for all these prospects, and it's time to fill in some of these holes I've been discussing via trade and via free agency and acquire the pitching we need to take us to the top pronto. I get that Cashman wants to hold on to his prized prospects, but this window where we're paying, guys like Judge and Severino basically nothing, this window is going to close more rapidly than you might think. I don't know how this season plays out, but to me, that has to be the attitude this winter. It's time to win, and it's time to win now. It's time to put the absolute best team on the field now, not to wait for some future point to spend our ample resources, both financial resources and prospect resources. The time is now. We have one championship this century. Boston has 3. And they're the odds-on favorites to win a 4th. We have not won a division title since 2012, and the way that we won those 4 championships during the Torrey years was through a combination of homegrown players and free agency and big-time trades for big-time players like Paul O'Neill, David Cohn, David Wells, and crucial role players like, Cecil Fielder, Ruben Sierra, and many more. We spent money. I understand the reasoning, again, behind the homegrown approach. Financially, it's very nice not to have to pay that luxury tax and to pay guys like Aaron Judge $500,000 a year, but fans don't give a hoot in hell about the luxury tax. They don't care. They want to win, and it's time to get aggressive and shell out the money for the pieces we need to make this a much more competent ball club in every phase of the game. And I'll delve into our managerial issues later in the podcast, but it's time to get back to playing Yankee baseball, because what we've seen these past few months, pitchers nibbling, hitters whiffing, infielders asleep at the switch, manager afraid to say a single harsh word, that is not the Yankee culture, that is not Yankee baseball, and Yankee fans here in New York and all over the country deserve better. Too sloppy, too lackadaisical, and I'll give you an example of what I mean by Yankee baseball. When Lance Lynn walked off the mound on Monday in Chicago in the 7th inning, after delivering a superb, much-needed gem, up 7-0, he wasn't smiling and he wasn't puffed up. You know what he did? Go look at the replay. He cursed himself for giving up that last base hit, just the second White Sox hit in the entire ballgame. Now that is a Yankee. Back in a moment. We are joined this week on Bronx Bombers by our friend Mike Calendrillo, who is the resident expert at the blog Yanks Go Yard. I'm a daily reader, and for those who haven't checked it out, please do so. Yanks Go Yard it's one of the few mandatory sites for hardcore Yankee fans. And Mike, it's great to have you back on the podcast, brother. How you doing?
I'm great. I do appreciate you bringing me back. I'm a huge listener, so everybody out there in podcast land, get on this podcast because Joe, you're doing great work.
Oh, thanks so much, man. So obviously the past few weeks weeks, really since late June, have been a period where a lot has gone wrong for this team. Shoddy defense, bullpen implosions, some terrible starts, a lot of our bats not producing, questionable moves by Aaron Boone, really all year, but I think recently it seems like every game. So I guess my question is, how worried are you about this team? I mean, is this just a really bad stretch but fixable? Or does this team have organic problems that, however the season plays out, Cashman has to address this winter?
I mean, I think it's honestly a little bit of both. You got to be worried at this point. I mean, like you said, you watched this team over the past month. We're 18-20 in the last 38 games. I mean, playing close to 500 ball, considering the blistering start that the Yankees had, it would have been fine in any other year. But look, the Red Sox refused to lose. The Astros now have the second best record in all of baseball. And now we've got Oakland and Seattle, who are pretty much lurking right behind the Yankees for the wild card. So unless the Yankees win a bunch of games in a row starting in Chicago to separate themselves, it's gonna be tough to stay ahead in that one game wild card play. And obviously you want to play in the Bronx. You don't want to go on the road. And again, you're gonna have to pitch Severino. You lose your ace in the one game. Obviously you have to win to go on. But it's a lot because again, we know you lost Judge, you lost Sanchez. Obviously that hurts the offense. But a World Series contending team, a team that fully expects to win at all costs, needs a spark from somebody else, anybody else. I personally thought it was going to be Giancarlo Stanton when Judge first went down, and Stanton's been okay, but there's just not enough life in this team. I mean, we saw it last week when third base coach Phil Nevin lost his mind in the dugout, and the players just kind of meandered around and didn't really seem like he was getting through to anyone. Now, obviously, I wasn't in the dugout, but that's what it looked like on TV. So I don't know how much more that they can kind of just go through the motions. I mean, I get that CC is still there. He's the heartbeat of the team, but he pitches once every 5 days. And yeah, we've got Brett Gardner, and he's been there forever, and he's a tough-nosed dude, and he lets his play do the talk, but he's much more Jeter-esque than he was Paul O'Neill. Paul O'Neill was a guy that get in your face, beat up a water cooler, instill some fear in a player, make you want to be better. You know, there's no Nick Swisher. You even look back to a team like last year when you had Torres and you had Todd Frazier, the guys that would keep it loose in the heart of a playoff race, and there's none of that this year because nobody is yet to step up. Now, obviously, a lot of that goes back on the manager, and maybe that's why Phil Nevin kind of lost his cool, but look, anything less than a World Series trip is going to be considered a failure with this team.
So, Mike, in this era that we're in of home runs and strikeouts, there's an ongoing debate about offense in Major League Baseball. On the one hand, the old school types are focused on situational hitting, just putting the ball in play, and the new school types are all about power, hit the ball as hard as you can all the time, obsessed with exit velocity. So, and that's very much the Yankees' approach. So what's your take on this debate, Mike? Do the Yankees need to bring back a little more of that old school approach and maybe not be swinging for the fences every single at bat?
Yeah, I think that's a must, especially in a short series. I mean, there's simply too many factors that you have to take into consideration to count on the long ball to win you games, especially in a 4 out of 7 series. I mean, the Yankees the other day made David Price look like his former Cy Young winning self because why? They left too many runners in scoring position. They tried to tie the game each time by hitting the ball all the way to Yawkey Way, which again, you have the players to do, but that isn't necessarily the thing that should be done. What happened to advancing runners, hitting in runners in scoring position, hitting the ball the other way? This team does not steal bases. I mean, that seems like something that is so foreign. I can't even get over it. But it really does speak to a club that refuses to play fundamentally sound. Manufacturing runs in the postseason is the way to win. Great defense, really good pitching, and manufacture runs. Hitting the ball the other way, working deep counts. I mean, that may be old school, but again, that seems a much more efficient, a much more definitive way of playing ball instead of just saying, well, I'm going to try to jack the ball out of the stadium, and whether I'm down 1 run or 4 runs, we'll come back in a hurry. The thing about playing small ball and manufacturing runs, it allows your starters to replenish themselves before heading back on the mound, and it works the other way. Both pitchers and fielders hate long innings. It takes them out of their groove, especially offensively. And again, baseball's a mind game, and it seems like the Yankees have done very little of that this season, and it shows when you can't score runs if you're missing Aaron Judge and you're missing Gary Sanchez, who are home run hitters.
Now, one bright spot in that dismal series in Boston was the performance of Chance Adams, far from perfect, but certainly better than Sabathia or Severino, which isn't saying a whole lot. But as you put it in a recent piece, Adams showed moxie through strikes, which was definitely a breath of fresh air. So two-part question. Why did the Yankees go with Adams over the more highly touted Justice Sheffield in that game? And then just general thoughts on his performance and what you see as Chance Adams' future on this ball club.
Yeah, it's a curious question. I know obviously from the little bit of watching Justice Sheffield at AAA, he can strike out batters in bunches. I mean, the last outing he struck out 6. He has a little bit of control issues, which leads to some walks, but he has definitely cut down on that recently. I'm not sure if the Yankees are just afraid to expose him at this point and maybe want to give him the rest of this year to really dominate AAA and then start a fresh season. I'm not a big proponent of bringing him up in September and letting him pitch out of the bullpen. The guy's a starter. You want to leave him as that. Again, he's a little undersized, 5'11", but he does throw hard, so he's got a lot of bonuses. Look, he's the number one prospect in the farm system, so maybe they are afraid right now to throw him to the wolves, which is why I was really, really kind of confused as to why you pitched Chance Adams against the Red Sox in Boston. I mean, look, he's 23, but he still struggled horrifically this year at AAA. He was 3-5. He's got like a 4.5 ERA. This was a guy that started as a number 6 prospect to begin the year, and by midseason dropped to 13. But I like the guy. He's got a ton of upside. He threw 83 pitches the other day, 53 for strikes. He gave up 3 runs, but it was all home runs. And again, it was early home runs. He got the jitters out, and I think that he did exactly what the Yankees could have asked from him. Go out 5 innings. He only allowed 1 walk, struck out 2. He kept the Yankees in the game. Now, obviously, the offense didn't show up once again. But again, moving forward, whether this kid stays up, probably not, but he can go back to AAA, he can continue his development, and I think he's going to be really good. But again, the Yankees at this point need to decide what this kid's future is. Is he going to be a mid-rotation guy? Some people have said he's better suited as in an Adam Warren type of long relief role. Let's figure it out already. One way or the other, this kid needs to pitch in the big leagues. I mean, Mookie Betts said after the game that Adams has a good arm. He's going to be really good once he gets the opportunity, and that's the key. Figure out what you're going to do with Adams. These guys are proven that maybe they're a little stale in the minors. They need that next level, and definitely that's what Adams showed against the Red Sox.
So to me, there's a grand total of 2 guys on this rotation who are guaranteed to be here next season, Severino and Tanaka. And the other 3 spots in the rotation are very much up for grabs. I don't believe we'll re-sign Sabathia, nor should we. I think we'll get rid of Gray one way or another the second the season ends, and obviously Montgomery won't be fully recovered from Tommy John until late next season, if then. And there are some pretty good pitchers in this free agent class, including the 2 recent Yankee additions, Jay Happ and Lance Lynn. So we'll see how those 2 guys do in this kind of extended audition in pinstripes. But I'm going to throw out 5 other names at you and give me your thumbs up or thumbs down as far as whether the Yankees should pursue them and why. So the first would be 29-year-old left-hander Patrick Corbin of the Diamondbacks.
Yeah, we know he's from Syracuse. He's already talked about his love for the Yankees growing up as a fan, what it would mean to him to play in the Bronx. That is something that money can't buy. That's what the organization needs to get back to. Guys that embody the Yankee way. And it might sound like, that's just the old way of thinking, but I'm only 35, so I'm not that old. But regardless, it doesn't hurt that he's 8-4, 3.31 ERA, 1.61 whip, career high 11.1 strikeouts to 9. I like the guy. I mean, obviously he's going to be 30, so you got to be careful, 4 or 5 year deal. But again, I don't love the free agent class as much as some people. I still think that the Yankees need to go out and acquire a frontline guy to take that pressure off of Severino, whether it's a DeGrom, a Bumgarner, a Snell, somebody that is going to cost somebody really good from your system. But Corbin is definitely a guy I would love as a number 3 or a really high-end number 4.
Okay, next up, 35-year-old right-hander Charlie Morton, who's having another good year in Houston, 2.90 ERA.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for Charlie Morton to go back to his his Philadelphia and Pittsburgh days. 42 and 63 with an ERA around 4.4 in 8 seasons. 35. I don't know what his turnaround is really, how or why, whether it's spin rate or him just being in the middle of a really good Astros staff, but I don't think he should leave at all, no matter how much money people throw at him. And again, I think it's still, I know he's 12-2, but it's Charlie Morton. He's 35, and I just wouldn't touch it.
Okay, 29-year-old right-hander Nathan Eovaldi, ex-Yankee, a number of good starts recently, including one against us this past weekend in Boston.
Yeah, 8 scoreless innings. He looked like the nasty native a couple years ago when he was 14-3 for the Yanks. Yankees could have had him at the deadline. For whatever reason, they decided to go with Lance Lynn and J.A. Happ. Obviously, Tampa wanted, were pretty high on getting back a solid prospect, which they did from Boston. Again, though, it's a guy who's had 2 Tommy John surgeries, always a gamble. But again, he does know how to pitch with the Yankees, had a great season a couple years ago. I'd offer him a 2-year incentive-laden deal. But to me, again, he's another mid-rotation guy. He's a number 4. He'd be a great number 5 if he's willing to come back to the Yankees. I know he wanted to before he signed with the Rays a couple years ago, but the Yankees kind of could put the kibosh on that. So it'll be interesting to see his time with the Red Sox. Maybe he'll be endeared to the Boston way. But there's definitely some upside still with Eovaldi at that age.
All right, 32-year-old left-hander Gio Gonzalez of the Nationals.
Oh, man, yeah. To me, he's nothing more than a number 5. Now, like you said, if you're not bringing back CeCe or Happ, who's also 35, then yeah, if I can get Gio on the cheap for 1 or 2 years, he'll eat up some innings. Maybe a change of scenery would definitely revitalize his career to a certain extent, although pitching in the AL East as opposed to the NL East can definitely present an entire set of challenges. So he would be one of the guys I would keep on the back burner because he just isn't the same type of pitcher he was a couple years ago with Washington.
And finally, another left-hander, 30-year-old Dallas Keuchel, a bit more of a struggle this year than last. Actually, his ERA of 3.61 is 2 percentage points higher than Sabathia's, but your take on Dallas Keuchel, Mike?
I don't think he's ever going to get back to that Cy Young year. The year after that, he was dreadful. He's just an up-and-down pitcher right now, and it's not like the Yankees don't have enough of that. So, yeah, he's 9-9. He really needs a great defense behind him because he does put a lot of balls in play. So, yeah, looking at where the Yankee defense is right now with those kids in the infield, that's it's a little bit of a scary proposition for a guy that's probably going to want close to about $75-85 million.
Now, 2 big contributors to whatever success we've had this year have been rookies Miguel Andujar and Gleyber Torres. Defensively, they've certainly had their issues, to say the least, but Andujar's .291 batting average leads the team, and Gleyber, who hasn't looked great since his return from the DL, but even so, his .872 OPS is second only to Aaron Judge on the team. So give me your analysis, Mike, on how these two have performed, positives and negatives, and which of them, in your mind, has a leg up for AL Rookie of the Year?
You gotta love their bats. I mean, for them being so young, they don't look like it at the plate. They look like seasoned veterans, especially Torres before the injury. I mean, and they're only going to get better with the stick. I mean, which is really scary when you consider how young they really are. And again, we knew coming into the season that both their gloves were iffy. Torres being a converted shortstop, learning the nuances of second base, and Andujar not only having the trouble with his glove, but also with his arm. But again, he's progressed. They both maybe have 10 errors this season apiece, but I think you got to give the nod for AL Rookie of the Year to Torres. Not only did he make the All-Star team, even though he was unable to play, he does have that OPS of 872 to Andujar's 815. So again, you really can't go wrong with either of these guys. And I think obviously with still over a month and a half left to play, there's a lot that can happen. I mean, Andujar goes on streaks. We know he's a doubles machine. He could definitely leapfrog Gleyber. But if I had to go right now, I go with Gleyber and I go with Andy too. A 1-2 finish is not too bad considering Judge won it last year.
You think maybe Andujar gets dealt for a pitcher this offseason and Cashman makes a move on Machado?
I mean, that's what it's going to take to get a big-time shooter. And like we said, I don't love the free agent class of pitchers. I don't think it's, aside from Corbin, I don't think it's a much better than what we have in the minors. So if you had to trade Andujar and you had to send him to the Mets for DeGrom, who's still 29, who seems to be a guy who just cannot get a win because of that horrendous Mets team, and he's got the best ERA we've ever seen on such a bad team. You got to do it. I mean, if you have to trade for Bumgarner, again, this is a guy who's the number one. Yes, he would be a number two on the Yankees, but that's the type of frontline thing you need to really advance in the postseason. And if Andy has to go, if you can obviously replace him with a Machado, who is a great all-around player, whether he's at short or third, and again, that'll be a big decision for him. If he's really adamant on sticking at short, then the Yankees need to decide, well, does Didi become expendable? I mean, as much as we love him, he's only got 1 year left in arbitration. Does that, offer another idea for a trade? Obviously, Glaber can go to short. So there are a lot of options, but I'm never trading Torres. If I had to get a big-time starting pitcher and Andujar was the only way, then yeah, pull the trigger in a heartbeat.
Now, Ronald Torres is a fan favorite. He's a clubhouse favorite. Versatile guy. In his 24 games with the Yankees this year, he's hitting .323, and Neil Walker, although he's played better recently, is hitting just .224, so 100 points lower. Why is Torres being buried in the minors, Mike?
Neil Walker, because Brian Cashman gave him $4 million, and he is a switch-hitting veteran capable of playing, I guess, one more position than Torres. He can play first, whereas Torres can play short. It's a shame because he's stuck in AAA. Obviously, we know that there was some complications with his wife, and it seems like everything is better now, so he's back to playing with the AAA Rail Riders. But my biggest problem with the whole situation is that Toe not being on the 25-man roster is clearly affecting the clubhouse culture. I mean, we spoke about this earlier. Where is the fun? Where's the team, the Toe Night Show with Starlin Castro and Todd Frazier? Where are these guys that basically are still young men in the beginnings of their careers, having fun and exceeding expectations? And you took Torres out of that scrappy utility guy who always seemed to come up with a clutch hit, and you replaced him with, Neil Walker, who's proven, but definitely at 32 is on the downside of his career. And Torres, even though he might have come up with the Dodgers, he embodied what it meant to be a Yankee, and it just seems like, we're just going to send him down because he has options. Well, obviously, it's affecting the clubhouse, so I really wish they would make a change because, again, 18 and 20 in your last 38 games, something needs to be switched up.
So obviously, Gary Sanchez has had an absolutely dreadful year on both sides of the ball, hitting just .186. So there's no shielding his pass ball issues now with offense. And after supposedly working on his defense all winter, he showed no improvement. No improvement at all, on top of which he's shown a lack of hustle on more than one occasion, which to me is kind of unforgivable. But Mike, given his power potential, how much of a leash does Sanchez have in this organization? If he ends the season hitting .190, again leads the league in passed balls, and does little or nothing in the postseason, assuming we even get there, do the Yankees consider other options behind the plate?
It depends who's available. If a guy like Sal Perez is available from Kansas City, and obviously they're in a rebuild, that's something you definitely need to take a look at. Obviously Sanchez is going to get the benefit of the doubt because of what he did, in a year and a half with the Yankees. And yes, his offense is much, much more valuable as a catcher. That's the thing. But I really think the Yankees need to consider taking him out from behind the plate as soon as next season, whether it's working in the entire winter on learning the nuances of first base, because again, he's somewhat of an athletic player. He's a big kid. He's going to be 26 in December, but catching is definitely wearing down his body. Whether he wants to admit it or not, the decreased OBP, batting average, there's something there. You don't go from a guy who hit 30-something home runs and was your best hitter, and he lost it overnight. That doesn't happen. So, we've seen other catchers throughout the years, Buster Posey, Joe Mauer, it wears on them so they eventually move from the catcher position. So if this guy is going to be part of your Yankee core for the next 10 years, get him out of the position because, like you said, yes, he does have a great arm and he may call a fine game, but the defensive part of blocking balls, which is so important, seems to not be getting any better. Now, more than likely, they're going to stick him back there and they're going to go with him again and they're going to try as hard as they might to get him to understand how to block a ball. You don't want to stick him at a DH, for the rest of his career because he is only going to be 26, but if you can let him learn to play some first base, he can better his footwork around the bag. He's got a great arm. He could be a real plus at the bag at first base.
Now, you and I said back in February that this was a make-or-break season for Greg Bird. He has the lowest OPS of our consistent starters at 737, hitting just 223. Solid defensively for the most part, but in that crucial play on Sunday night, unable to scoop up Andujar's admittedly horrible throw that would have ended that game. I think Teixeira makes that scoop. Bird also very slow on the base paths. So same question as Sanchez, Mike. If this trend continues, do the Yankees look at some other options at first base this offseason, and should they?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you can continue to just give a guy the benefit of the doubt because he has potential. I don't see anything more than an average player. He'll hit some home runs, he'll drive in a few, but that average in OBP, it's not getting any better. And again, it always goes back to, it's the injuries. Well, you know what? This is actually a career high 57 games he's played, 224 plate appearances, and what? Yeah, okay, he's healthy, but are we employing just average guys that might be able to take a left-handed reliever deep in a playoff game? I mean, what are we looking for? Because if Tyler Austin was left-handed, maybe he'd still be with the team, but he wasn't. He was a right-hander, and now he's a part of the Twins. So I am not really sure how much of a leash more the Yankees can afford to give Greg Bird. Let's see if there's a first baseman out there, Jose Abreu with the White Sox. Let's see somebody that can actually take the position that we don't have to continually talk about and worry about because he's not living up to what everybody thinks he should be doing. I mean, that's the bottom line. On a team that is still very good, I'm a little concerned that this is our first baseman of the future. That doesn't make me feel very good, and especially just the wait and see game. No, World Series teams don't wait and see. They go out and make something happen.
Okay, Aaron Boone, we both approached this hire with open minds, and I know we're, 26 games over 500 here on Monday, but let's be honest, that winning streak back in May when Didi was hitting like DiMaggio and we got some really good starting pitching, take away that 18-1 streak, and this is basically just a decent ball club at best. And what disturbs me even more than Boone's decision-making is something that's more subjective, a lack of urgency on this ball club. Those championship teams under Torre, who was also a nice guy, just like Boone, but those teams hated to lose. And for the most part, they were also very good defensive teams. I mean, if a player screwed up, covered the wrong bag, something we've seen a lot of this year, I mean, it could have been Derek Jeter, but Torre was going to give him that death glare and an earful. So sadly, I think we're seeing a void of leadership on this team, and I hate to say it, but I'm pretty sure at this point that this hire was a mistake by Cashman. And I'm 100% positive that hiring a bench coach in Josh Bard with basically no more experience than Boone was a huge mistake. But what's your take, Mike? Am I being too hard on Aaron Boone, or has his tenure bothered you as well?
No, I don't think you're being hard at all. I think it's warranted, everything you said. He has shown the inability to manage a bullpen. We've known that. We've seen that over and over again. Now, I don't know where the disconnect is. Either he doesn't consult Larry Rothschild or Larry's asleep at the wheel and needs to retire. But the thing with Boone is he's a 12-year big leaguer turned broadcaster turned Yankee skipper. So I don't know what people really wanted to expect out of him. Basically, he was hired to put the lineup out there, to be a player's manager, and to speak to the media, because those are all things that Joe Girardi, for whatever reason, didn't do according to the organization. Now, my only complaint so far is, like I said, for a player's manager, for a guy who was in the big leagues a long time and came from a big league family, his brother, his father, his grandfather, this club definitely lacks credibility, very little cohesion. If he makes the playoffs, then maybe he keeps his job. But if they don't get to the ALCS, which is where Joe Girardi got, Boone is going to be the fall guy. It'll be another manager, but this time it'll be a manager with plenty of experience, because they tried the route with a guy with no experience, and it wasn't just him, it was Hensley Mullins, and it was Joe McEwing, and it was just one guy after the other that, yes, they might have had coaching experience, but coaching experience and managerial experience are two totally different things. Now, who knows if we do see another managerial change? It could be a guy like Mike Scioscia, it could be Dusty Baker. Now, I'm not advocating for either of them, but you can definitely, if something goes awry and Boone were to step down, you can bet your bottom dollar that they will hire a man with many, many years of experience, like they had with Joe Girardi.
You think maybe they take a look at Don Mattingly? I
would love Don Mattingly, again, going back to the fact that he knows what it is to be a Yankee. It's the only team that he ever played for professionally. He needs to get out of Miami, even though, again, they've played far exceedingly well compared to what Derek Jeter, everybody gave that man a lot of grief for tearing down and building up. But again, he's taken a page out of the Cubs book and the Astros, and you know what? They'll be good in a couple years. But yeah, Don, I would love to see Don come back. It would revitalize the team. It would revitalize the fan base, especially if there's an early out in the postseason. I don't know if the Steinbrenner boys would do that because, it seems like they are trying to distance themselves from the past, from their father's legacy. But yeah, one way or the other, I would love to see Don back in pinstripes where, maybe he should have been all along and Joe Girardi, got the job from him at the last minute. Who knows?
All right, Mike, great having you on as always. You do phenomenal work, and all our listeners should check out Mike's work on Yanks Go Yard and the work of his colleagues as well. First-class analysis every day, and he's also a great follow on Twitter. That's at MA Calendrillo on Twitter. Thanks so much for taking the time, Mike. We really appreciate it, and hopefully we can do it again when the leaves start to change, okay?
Always a pleasure, Joe. I can't wait. Thanks, man.
You got it. All right, we'll come back. More Bronx Bombers in just a moment.
And now the answer to today's Bronx Bombers trivia question. Which Yankee pitcher has the most World Series wins? The answer? B. Whitey Ford, with 10 World Series victories. And now here's Joe with this week's Twitter poll.
Yes, this week's Twitter poll results are in. We asked you this. If the Yankees continue to play lackluster 500 ball the rest of the season, should Aaron Boone be replaced? And 73% of our followers on Twitter at Bombers Podcast said yes, and 27% said no. I mean, look, I believe the media last winter that the players did not care for Girardi. I thought it was plausible. But I also think that whether the players like or don't like the manager is not really that important. I hate to keep bringing up military metaphors here, but the soldiers who fought under General Patton, for the most part, hated his guts. Most effective general of World War II. And back to baseball, did Reggie Jackson like Billy Martin or vice versa? No, they hated each other. But so what? They won. And from what I've read, Mickey Mantle and Casey Stengel didn't have the greatest relationship either. But, again, so what? They won. That's all people remember. And, I said earlier that Cashman's single flaw has been his inability to assemble a dominant starting rotation, at least not since the late 90s. I'm going to amend that. Cashman did not renew Girardi's contract because he wanted a warm and fuzzy guy who was good with the media and perhaps more importantly, who he could control. Unfortunately, the guy he selected, who does indeed possess those qualities, has no experience with coaching at any level, and it shows. This is going to sound kind of harsh, but it's the truth. I look at Aaron Boone and I don't see a major league manager. I see basically a public relations man / motivational speaker, and his decisions, especially with the bullpen, but with the lineup as well, have been suspect from the very first series back in March in Toronto, when he had David Robertson walk the struggling Josh Donaldson to face Justin Smoke, who promptly hit a grand slam. Now, maybe Boone would have been an okay hire for a team in the early stages of transition, so he could have, kind of learned on the job with the players. I doubt that, but this was not a transition year. It was not viewed that way by Yankees management, nor was it sold to the fans that way. So what Cashman did here was build a Ferrari and hand the keys to a kid who hasn't even taken his driver's test yet, essentially. And yes, Boone is a good guy, and yes, he handles the media very well, but what in God's name does that have to do with playing winning baseball to managing winning baseball? Nothing. The truth is, if I could snap my fingers right now and get Girardi back in that dugout, I'd do it in a second. If I could snap my fingers right now and get Don Mattingly in that dugout, I'd do it in a second. To make matters worse, the Yankees didn't hire a bench coach who had any experience either. A guy who could have, like a Don Zimmer type, who could have maybe provided some gravitas and some valuable necessary input. They hired Josh Bard, who almost has as little experience as Boone, because I don't know why, because they're friends. Wonderful. Meanwhile, Oakland, a team with the third lowest payroll in baseball, $100 million lower than the Yankees, is breathing down our necks for that top wildcard spot. What we have seen time and time again when our pitchers falter in a big spot, Boone absolutely freezes. He has been late far too often getting guys warmed up in the bullpen, and he is late pulling pitchers who obviously have nothing. We saw 2 games this week, 2 games in a row, where he allowed Yankee pitchers, Sonny Gray and then Jonathan Holder, to get pummeled for 7 runs each before pulling them. And he froze like a deer in the headlights in that 4th game in Boston when Chapman clearly had nothing. He just sat there, chewing on sunflower seeds, and allowed our closer to throw over 40 pitches and cough up a 3-run lead. Now granted, Andujar butchered that play at third base, and that would have ended the game, but again, poor fundamentals don't speak well for the manager either, or the coaching staff. We were told Boone was ready, that he was a baseball lifer who had somehow, by osmosis, absorbed the knowledge that was going to make him a competent manager of a team ready to win a championship now. And clearly that was false. He was not ready. And so yes, barring a remarkable turnaround and postseason success, at the very least matching that of last year, Boone should be replaced by someone with the experience, someone with the knowledge and gravitas and leadership skills to manage this very talented baseball team. Will that happen? I doubt it unless we miss the playoffs. Cashman has an ego and, he hasn't been that quick to admit mistakes in the past, the few he's made. And this is where you kind of miss George, the boss. The boss would have banished Sonny Gray from that rotation way earlier, correctly. And he would have correctly viewed the rest of this season as an ongoing audition by Aaron Boone and his coaching staff to keep their jobs. I mean, if you're Brian Cashman, did you bring Aaron Boone here to win a championship or, a freaking popularity contest with the players? Seriously, I mean, the fact that we're talking wild card at all is damning enough. But to be in an actual race with Oakland and Seattle is pretty brutal given the expectations. And so yes, if this shoddy play continues and we don't do better than last year in the postseason, or at least as good, I really think that he should be replaced after the season, if not sooner, with somebody more competent, whether it's Joe Girardi, whether it's Don Mattingly, with somebody who has the skills and the experience to lead us to our 28th World Championship. And that'll do it for this week's supersized episode of Bronx Bombers. Again, don't forget, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher, find us on Spotify, follow us on Twitter, @BombersPodcast is the handle, like us on Facebook as well, but most of all, have faith in the Yankees. We'll see you in 2 weeks.